Violin. The most imitated instrument in the history of Western music, and nobody really knows exactly where it came from. The modern violin emerged in northern Italy in the mid-16th century, most likely in Cremona. Andrea Amati, whose workshop established the basic proportions and construction methods still used today, is the earliest maker whose instruments survive. Within a century, it had spread across Europe and displaced the viol family that had dominated court music for generations. A Stradivarius violin, made in Cremona around 300 years ago, can sell at auction for between $15 and $20 million. Researchers have spent decades trying to identify what makes them sound different from modern instruments: the wood, the varnish, the aging process. No one has definitively replicated their sound. Does the world's most expensive instrument actually sound better, or is it just the name? The body is carved from spruce for the top and maple for the back and sides, joined around an arched internal structure. 4 strings, tuned G, D, A, E, from low to high, played with a horsehair bow. Quality shows in the evenness of the wood grain, the precision of the arching, and the string response across all positions. The most historically significant makers: Stradivari, Guarneri del Gesù, Amati. The violin leads the orchestral string section and carries more melodic weight in classical music than any other instrument. Folk traditions worldwide adapted it: Irish fiddle, bluegrass, klezmer, Indian classical, Romani music, often changing the technique, tuning, and ornamentation entirely. Niccolò Paganini pushed its technical limits so far in the early 19th century that audiences thought he had made a deal with the devil. From that unmistakable high voice, the family moves down to a range that most people hear without ever noticing. Viola. The middle voice of the violin family, essential to the sound, almost never in the spotlight. The viola developed alongside the violin in 16th century Italy as the alto voice of the emerging string family. Its proportions were never standardized the way the violins were, and makers have debated the ideal size for centuries. For most of music history, it sat in the inner voices of the orchestra and quartet, rarely given a melody to carry. The viola is unique in the violin family for not having a standard size. Violins are 35.5 centimeters long, cellos are 76. The viola sits somewhere between 40 and 48 centimeters, depending on the maker, meaning every player adapts to a slightly different instrument. There is no correct viola, and that ambiguity has defined its history. Is that freedom, or just an oversight nobody fixed? Construction mirrors the violin: spruce top, maple back and sides, arched body. 4 strings tuned C, G, D, A, a fifth lower than the violin. The larger body produces a darker and warmer tone, but also makes it physically harder to play at full stretch. Stradivari, Amati, and Guarneri all made violas, though fewer survive than violins. The viola fills the harmonic middle ground in orchestral and chamber music, sitting between the violins above and cellos below. Its dark nasal tone gives it a quality that doesn't project like the violin, but sits deep in an ensemble's texture. Bela Bartok's viola concerto was left unfinished at his death. William Primrose and Yuri Bashmet are among the few viola players who built major solo careers. If the viola is the voice no one notices, the cello is the one no one forgets. Cello. The instrument that sounds closest to the human voice, and the one composers reached for most often when they wanted music to feel like grief. The cello emerged in northern Italy in the mid to late 16th century, alongside the violin and viola, filling the bass role in the developing string ensemble. Its proportions were standardized by the early 18th century. Johann Sebastian Bach's 6 suites for unaccompanied cello, composed around 1717 to 1723, remain the most demanding and celebrated solo works ever written for the instrument. The end pin, the metal spike at the bottom that anchors the cello to the floor, was not commonly adopted until the late 19th century. Before that, players balanced the full weight of the instrument on their calves and knees. This single metal rod revolutionized how the cello was played and what was technically possible. Does it surprise you that such a basic addition came so late? 4 strings tuned C, G, D, A, 1 octave below the viola. The body measures about 76 centimeters and rests between the player's knees on the end pin. Same spruce and maple construction as the rest of the family. Quality shows in the depth and evenness of resonance across all 4 strings. Stradivari, Montagnana, and Domenico Montagnana cellos command extraordinary prices at auction. The cello anchors the string section's bass and inner voices in the orchestra, but it has a solo repertoire unlike any other low instrument. Brahms, Dvorak, Elgar, and Schumann all wrote major concertos for it. Yo-Yo Ma's recordings made the instrument accessible to audiences who had never considered classical music. Jacqueline Dupre's Elgar Cello Concerto, recorded in 1965, remains one of the most emotionally powerful recordings in the classical catalogue. Below the cello, the orchestra drops to its deepest foundation, and to the one instrument in this family that actually comes from a different lineage entirely. Double bass. The largest instrument in the orchestra, and the one most musicians take for granted until it stops playing. The double bass traces its roots to the bass viol, or violone, of the 16th and 17th centuries, making it the only member of the modern string section that descends from the viol family rather than the violin family. Unlike its relatives, it went through centuries of variation in size, tuning, and number of strings before settling into its current form in the 18th and 19th centuries. The double bass is the only orchestral string instrument still commonly played in 2 different tuning systems. Orchestral players typically tune in fourths, E, A, D, G, but some players, particularly in Vienna, still use a centuries-old tuning in thirds that requires a completely different technique. 2 systems, same instrument, both in professional use right now. Have you ever noticed a difference in the sound of an orchestra's bass section? The largest instrument in the violin family, standard orchestral basses, stand about 180 centimeters tall. 4 strings, tuned E, A, D, G, sounding 1 octave below written pitch. Played with a bow or plucked. The body construction borrows from the flat-backed viol tradition and varies more than any other family member. Top historical makers, Gasparo da Cello and Giovanni Paolo Maggini. The double bass anchors the harmonic foundation of the orchestra, locking with the low brass and timpani. In jazz, it became the primary bass instrument from the 1920s through the 1950s, played pizzicato before the electric bass guitar largely replaced it. Charles Mingus treated it as a compositional voice equal to any other. Scott LaFaro's work with the Bill Evans Trio redefined what jazz bass could do melodically. All 4 of those instruments trace their DNA back to the same Italian workshops. The last one on this list doesn't, because it was built to strip everything those workshops stood for down to its bare minimum. Electric violin. The violin with the hollow body removed and a completely different set of possibilities in its place. The first electric violins appeared in the 1930s, when manufacturers applied pickup technology being developed for guitars to the string family. Early instruments were standard acoustic violins fitted with contact microphones. By the 1940s, solid-body electric violins were being built specifically for amplification. The instrument stayed on the margins of popular music for decades until rock and jazz fusion players in the 1960s and 70s brought it into new contexts. An electric violin produces almost no sound without amplification. Hold one and pluck the strings, and you hear a thin, metallic whisper. The body exists only to hold the strings and hardware, not to resonate. This makes it the opposite of everything the violin was designed to be for 400 years. What does that say about how much of an instrument's identity lives in its electronics rather than its wood? Solid or semi-hollow body in wood, carbon fiber, or acrylic. 4 strings tuned G, D, A, E, identical to the acoustic violin. Pickups convert string vibration to an electrical signal sent to an amplifier or effects processor. With no acoustic resonance chamber, the tone is entirely shaped by electronics. Prominent makers: NS Design, Zeta, and Yamaha's Silent Violin series. Jazz fusion saw the electric violin rise to prominence in the 1970s, with Jean-Luc Ponty crafting an entire style around it. Rock bands like Kansas integrated it as a textural element. Its ability to process effects in real time, reverb, distortion, looping, makes it behave more like a guitar than a classical instrument in a live context. Vanessa Mae brought it to mainstream audiences in the 1990s through crossover pop recordings. Every instrument in this family started in the same workshop tradition in 16th century northern Italy and went in completely different directions from there. Which one surprised you the most? Leave it in the comments, and if you want to go deeper into the instruments behind the music, subscribe. There's a lot